Boom.
Eurovision.
Boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom music.
Boom, boom go NATO weapons.
Boom, boom goes the Eurovision.
Indeed. Some techno song won't go first.
Just nothing but techno music these days. Like, I mean, it's like gone as the gone are the days of the more traditional, bad word,
I remember
traditional Eurovision Song Contest entrants and their music.
the last time
just
I
doesn't
saw
happen
a
anymore.
guitar on Eurovision was the Irish winner, 96 or so.
Yeah.
It was something about it was a song lamenting the loss of radio or something like that, the old radio days or something, you know. It was a kind of a lament.
Rock
it was
and roll.
nice, and two lads on a guitar. Yeah, now it's tinny, noisy. It was supposed to be in Ukraine.
Tinny, noisy, campy.
Oh,
Don't forget campy, Neil. I mean,
well, campy, it's always been campy, but now
No.
it's freaky.
no.
Freaky.
It
It's
wasn't,
freaky. It's like, who's the most mutilated person?
it wasn't,
Give
al-
them the award.
it wasn't always campy.
No?
No,
Okay.
not
well,
always.
well, it became campy, but now it's way
It
past that.
got campier.
Campy was fine. You know, you could laugh and join in the crack. But,
Depends what you mean by campy, though.
well, when you've got mutilated people, it's covered in tats.
Mutilation. What are you talking about, Neil? You're
Yeah.
offending half our audience.
Well, I mean, covered in them. Like
Oh, okay.
the one last night, well, it's a she, I believe. It's a she. It is a woman. This year they gave it to a bisexual Swedish immigrant. That's, you know, in going by recent years, that's
Not bad.
pretty
She doesn't-
straight
she-
down the middle.
She doesn't have a beard.
No. Yeah. And the bisexual part she kind of made up in 2017, 18.
Yeah.
So she's married, I believe. So
Right.
that could just
So
be
why not?
her, you know, you have to mix in with her.
You have to
the
say that
milieu,
for
you know.
Eurovision. Yeah. Maybe do people in America know what the Eurovision Song Contest is?
They probably do at this point. There's an entry from like Australia and all sorts of places. At this point, it's globalist vision.
There's no American.
Maybe
entry,
not.
so,
You gave him an explainer last year. Go back and go back and watch this show last year.
I did. Was it a good explainer?
I think it was, yeah.
Or a bunch of the campiest, queerest people from every European country gets together to see who's the best at singing.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And it used to be
It's a
strictly amateur. That was part
Right.
of it. Was kind of, I suppose, it was the forerunner to idols / talent shows that became ubiquitous in the last 20 years. And they had to be amateur. It was their first time, and they went through a nomination process in their home country.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
voting.
That still happens, but it's all fabricated now. And although Zelensky wasn't allowed to show up at it, he wanted to show up at it, but he wanted to give an address to the X number, 100 million people, to 160 million or whoever was going to watch it, that to tell them, like, send more money, send more weapons. And then the Eurovision said, no, that's, you know, against our policy, sort of, except we big up Ukraine throughout it anyway, you know what I mean? It was meant, like you said, Ukraine won last year, so the country that wins it then hosts it the following year.
Yeah.
It was meant to be held in Ukraine this year.
So you can see why he wanted his. He had a stake in it.
Yeah.
I kind of see where he's coming from.
But surprise, surprise, the country that hosted it in Ukraine's stead was the Brits, of course, because they're Ukraine's bestest friend forever.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they're going to host it for Ukraine. But it was held in Liverpool, and Liverpool was all just Ukrainified. The city of Liverpool in the UK was Ukrainified for the competition, supposedly. Anyway, you can't believe much of what you hear these days. It's most normal people are just like, whatever, you know. But the interesting thing is that, just as a segue into, well, it's kind of a segue, related to the two is how CNN covered. Well, they kind of covered, they covered the Eurovision Song Contest, but they also covered something that happened a couple of days ago, which was an explosion in Turnipple, where they grow a lot of turnips. I think that's why it's called Turnipple. So in pretty far western Ukraine, there was a massive explosion there, and in another town not far away.
Klemitsky.
Yeah, but the biggest one was in Ternopil in western Ukraine, and it was pretty serious explosion. Quite clearly an ammunition dump, and CNN reported on that explosion in this way: Russian missiles target home city of Ukrainian Eurovision contestant during contest.
Right.
That's as far as they. That was all. That's the sum of their reporting on that event.
Of which the bomb or the Eurovision?
No, on that attack. That was
Okay.
it. It was only important because it was evidence of Russian skullduggery in, clearly, according to CNN, deliberately targeting this home city of one of the members. I think there were 5 or something in Ukrainian entry in the Eurovision. There were 5 members of a band, and one of them happened to come from this city in Western Ukraine. And because Russia targeted that city, and more specifically a massive NATO or weapons and military hardware, military equipment stockpile, CNN decided that they did that for that reason, because it was his. Because they don't even mention in the article that there was an ammunition.
Much less that there
depot.
were probably US and UK supplied
Well, of
ammo
course
that
not.
went up.
No, you're not allowed to say that. So,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
such. It's not even journal. It's just. Well, we all know.
it's a joke at this
rank
point. like.
propaganda. But if we are going to, culturally select our news in different ways, the entrant for Ukraine that won last year the guy was from the hometown, and it's a small town. It's not like a city. It is a town where Stepan Bandera was born. So
We should include that as well, yeah. But I mean, here's a video of the. Well, there's several videos of it. Here's one video of the actual explosion. There's closer up videos where people were closer to the actual explosion, but this gives a good view from.
That's the other city.
From a distance. No, this is the big one in Turnbull.
no, he even says it there. He got it right. I checked.
Oh, sorry,
that
yeah,
as well.
Kamenetsky. Okay, sorry, yeah.
But they are close. They are
Right,
close.
they're
They're both in Western Ukraine.
So the biggest one was in Kamenetsky, yeah. I think.
Whoa. I think the second one follows in this same shot.
Or not. Maybe that was a separate.
There
Oh,
you
there
go.
it is. Okay,
There
that's
you
the
go.
second
Look
one.
at the
That-
shock.
So that was the biggest one, yeah.
Yeah, that second one might have been fuel because of the blast wave or something. People are speculating. We don't know.
Well, that's the one, and there's other videos of that one closer up, and you can hear all the ammunition going off, like, you know what I mean? So
Popping all over the place.
secondary explosions all over the place. So
It's the same shot from further away. Yeah, it's mad. I've got some videos too, but people have probably seen them. Yeah,
the interest,
NATO weapons. Bye. But
yeah. Well, the interesting thing about this, Scotty, can you just pull up a map of, probably Google Maps would be good, and go to Ukraine, so you can just talk a little bit about where this actually happened. And
it was a heck of a week, actually. Those things happened yesterday morning, early morning a.m.
yeah,
Probably try and talk. We'll probably cover things out of sync, but the timings of different things are interesting. I'm not saying people have speculated that was in response to what happened the day before. Lugansk was bombed on Friday
right.
with cruise missiles. I put a question mark on my notes. I've since satisfied myself that both the Russians and the Brits are admitting that British missiles were involved in that. And Lugansk is interesting because the city itself is way behind the line. It hasn't been attacked really in a good while. No one has talked about it. It's really twisted what happened there, because the British reporting on it is that Lugansk was hit with 2 cruise missiles and that a Western military site was hit. The Telegraph specifically says a Russian supply depot and a military command center. The Telegraph report on it cites no one, gives no evidence for that. Well, the Russians have since taken photos and given descriptions which people can check for themselves on Google Maps. No, it was a home goods store in the city center and a food processing plant, which they obliterated. And then that was in one strike, and the second one was outside the city. Russians again showed video evidence and interviews with people. It's a residential street. okay, you've targeted military sites, and it doesn't appear that you have. Do you think that's the kind of thing that's deliberate? I mean, if as we know as a general rule, they are super selective about what they want to hit.
Except they didn't have any better intel to hit anything better, you know. And they have a lot of them, you know. Anyway, so tell them what you're talking about there.
Well, this is it's creepy, isn't it? The initials for this thing are the SS missile. Storm Shadow. Totally gay name, but there you go. That's the British name of a long-range cruise missile. And long-range, now, relative, it can hit up to 500 kilometers or so. But they say it's the upper ceiling they've given the Ukrainians is like 200 or 180 or so kilometers. Hence, it could hit Lugansk further behind the battlefront line. The British Minister of Defense announced like Thursday, we have approved, we are going to give Ukraine these longer range. This is like the escalation or the mission creep, as you said to me earlier, factor in this war. This is the next one up in terms of what it can do. It's air-to-air missile, so it will be fired from jets or choppers, probably just jets, I think. And it has a range of up to, apparently, it's going to be fixed at 180, 190 kilometers. So any further now, the Ukrainians will be able to hit Russia proper. So anyway, this ground announcement was made Thursday, and the next day, and the announcement by Ben Wallace, Defence Minister of the UK, was, we're going to, i.e., down the road, you'll see the effects of this. But in less than 24 hours, there's evidence that these SS missiles were used in the attack on Lugansk city centre, which is an interesting little deception. As something to keep in mind for all reporting you hear on the Ukraine war. Even the decent analysis people offer on podcasts and the round-the-clock coverage they are giving. There's some great stuff, I know, but there's a whole lot of stuff where people are guessing. And this is a classic example of deception working against anyone trying to get a clear picture of what's going on. They made it sound like we're about to give it to them. That usually implies they have to receive them. So they have to be snuck into Ukraine, right, without the Russians hitting it or seeing it. Then they have to be trained on it to fire the damn thing or to know how to work with it. But no, within 24 hours, an actual operational execution of the damn things happens, which means that all that other stuff took place months before. And the announcement was deceptive in that they were kind of signaling, I guess, that it's already done and dusted. And that kind of thing is probably going on all over the place. Like, remember all the stuff like about the Abrams tanks and the Challenger tanks that they're going to get with training. Oh, and we're going to withhold some functions of these things. For example, we won't allow them to have our beautiful Abrams tanks with a certain armor plating on it because if the Russians capture it, they can... Oh, bullshit. These people, we don't know. We don't know what is actually going into Ukraine, when it went in. This is just all surface stuff. It's probably primarily intended to throw the Russians off. Because then they're like trying to decipher what exactly they mean when they say going to deliver X in X quantity, in Y quantity. But in reality, they could have given them something actually better or worse, whatever, and much earlier. You know?
Yeah, for sure. There's also the possibility that, that there are actually NATO, British, English, whatever, or American personnel, military personnel, who are, for example, in the case of the Storm Shadow cruise missile attacks, probably 3 or 4 of them or something like that hit Lugansk, as you were saying. That they were fired by NATO personnel, not by Ukrainians.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Which would bypass the need for training.
I mean, at what point? How many years does this war have to go on for? How long? At what point do the Western powers, with personnel in the country, who know how to operate missile systems or whatever, like Patriot missile systems, air defense systems, particular artillery systems, particular cruise missiles? At what point do they say, will we actually get a bunch of Ukrainians over and spend 3-6 months training to do it, or should we just put one of our guys in there and have him push the button? At what point do you decide to do that? You know what I mean?
There's
At what point does it
there's
become
evidence they already have.
At what point does it become rational to do that instead of spending all this time training a bunch of Ukrainians from scratch on technology that they're not familiar with?
Yeah.
When you have a large number of people who are from your own country who are familiar with it and can operate it.
They're on record as saying that such has taken place. But it's always, of course, when it's a Washington Post reveal or something,
Right.
couching it in, it's just a few people. It's
Mhm.
always just a few. That may be the line of BS. Who knows? It's not a matter of concept. Is that what they might do at some point in the future? It's a matter of quantity. To
Right.
what extent is that happening?
Right.
That's an unknown. Because then, you do hear of counterstrikes. Either it's subtly alluded to by the Russians, or there are reports on the ground that become
Mm-hmm.
online chatter, for example, about smacking a large congregation of, quote, NATO advisors, in quotes,
Right.
in any one site. It could be near the battlefront or it could be way back over in the west of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
That's happened 3 or 4 times now in the last year. The Russians don't shout about it too loudly. And then on the other side, they just don't. We're not going to talk about that at all, of course.
Yeah.
It may be years before the scale of that comes out. I mean,
Right.
fucking go back to Vietnam. It was a long time before
Right.
the thousands of advisors
Exactly.
were a fact. They were a conspiracy theory of their own time for a
Right.
decade or more.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So yeah, just throw up a map there, like I was saying, Scotty, will you? Of Ukraine. So it's basically in the. Let me see. We're talking. See Kiev in the center there. Then we're talking just kind of west. Those.
there they are, yeah.
Right.
Ternopil and Khmelnytsky.
Yeah. See, Ternopil isn't that far from
Yeah.
Lviv or Lvov or whatever. So it's pretty far west in Ukraine, and that's where that massive explosion was, and it was a NATO, basically a NATO ammunition dump, very large. And the interesting thing is why people are saying, well, why would they collect so much ammunition in one place and leave it available? Well, they kind of, if you've been watching them, obviously you have, but if maybe you don't remember, but in over the past, say, but starting about maybe 6 months ago or even before that, you had quite a lot of Russian missile attacks on Western Ukraine. On those, the sporadic, every couple of months or something, they would fire a bunch of cruise missiles, 100 cruise missiles and drones and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of them would be targeted on Western Ukraine. Now, probably quite a number of those, given some credit to Ukrainian claims or whatever, were shot down. But then they reduced and they're in recent months there's been very little in the way of Russian attacks on Western Ukraine. Now, maybe I'm stretching a bit here, but I think it's possible. Maybe I'm doing too much 4D chess. I'm thinking too much in 4D chess, but basically this may have been a kind of a setup in a certain sense to lull the Ukrainians into a false sense of security by, over a period of time, not allowing them, but attacking Western Ukraine with various different missiles and giving them the confidence that they could shoot down, and which they did. Maybe say 50% of the missiles that were the cruise missiles that were targeted at Western Ukraine over the past several times over the past 6 months. Ukrainians get confident that they can shoot down at least a decent number of these, and then along with that, they see that the Russians have reduced their attacks on Western Ukraine. So a lot of Ukrainian air defense is in Western Ukraine, and it's fairly immune to Russian attack or Russian strikes. Russian can't destroy very easily Ukrainian air defense systems in Western Ukraine. So they stopped doing it. They stopped attacking Western Ukraine so much over the past 4 or 5 months, leading the Ukrainians into a kind of false sense of security that, listen, the Russians have finally have realized they tried. They weren't getting a very good hit rate on their missiles in their previous barrages because our air defense was working pretty well, i.e. American air defense effectively was working pretty well. So they basically stopped attacking Western Ukraine with these cruise missile barrages or any kind of missile barrages. So we're more confident that we can amass a large ammunition stockpile in one area, and then boom, they get hit with probably some kind of a hypersonic missile
Right.
that can't be shot down, you know.
Right.
And of course, it requires intelligence, for Russian intelligence, Russia getting the intelligence as to where the actual
And
ammunition stockpile
ongoing
was.
observation, yeah.
Yeah,
And if you strike too much too fast, they move it more. It's harder to get a read on what's going where.
Right.
But if you let them watch, you can see.
yeah, and it was pretty serious blow, because obviously a lot of that equipment would have been destined to Ukraine's much faded upcoming super awesome offensive to beat all offensives in the history of offensives that is coming any day now. It's counter-offensive, or it's offensive, however you want to describe it. That's going to take back Crimea and Donbass and
The
push
entire
on over to
entire
Turkey, maybe.
Ukrainian command is like, no, wait.
Yeah.
Zelensky, Zaluzhny, they're all like,
Yeah. And even more
hold
so
on,
now.
we're not ready.
Yeah.
We're not ready. But in the Western media, it's a fact. I've seen valid speculation that that's because they know it's not going to do anything. It's more like it's another kind of World War One type. Okay, blowing the whistle, everyone over the top, out of the trenches. Why? Just because it's time to do another one, you know.
Well, people need to understand, and I know it's not that palatable or pleasant. Or the ideal way you'd like to think about this conflict, as in, you know, somebody's winning bigly and somebody's losing bigly, and when's, you know, Russia going to start kicking ass, or when's Ukraine going to start kicking ass and drive Russia out? You know, people want to see decisive kind of moves on the board, but that's not the way war generally happens, especially this kind of war. It drags out for quite a long time. It's a war of attrition. It's strategy, you know, and that people need to understand that at least I think that the goal of the West here, and this of course is a Western war against Russia using the territory of Ukraine and Ukrainian troops to fight Russia. The goal of the US and the UK in particular, with their lackeys in Europe who are kind of somewhat half-heartedly going along with it, is to create a stalemate. There's no desire or intent or belief that Ukraine and / NATO can just beat Russia and kick them out of Ukraine. There's no real serious, anybody with any serious person does not expect that the Donbass would be taken back by Ukraine, that Crimea will go back to Ukraine. That's not going to happen, and they know that. But they're basically capitalizing on the fact that Russia is the one who took the initiative of invading Ukraine, so that they're in the position where they have to, if they don't do what they, or don't get what they intended to get out of this conflict, then that'll be a lose for Russia. And just pushing the situation to a stalemate is the intent of Western powers, of the US and the UK, using Ukraine as the hand in this conflict. That's their goal, is to create a situation where there's a stalemate. Russia doesn't really make very much gains, maybe can't even consolidate its control over all of the four regions that it has supposedly that it annexed in a certain sense, or that became part of Russia earlier this year. Or was it last year? I can't remember. Anyway,
September last year.
September last year. So that's what they want. That's what they want to. That's their goal. That's what they want to create in this situation. They don't want to. They know they can't defeat or beat Russia, but they can make it look and appear, to all intents and purposes, as a defeat, simply by Ukraine holding out, i.e., NATO and the US using Ukraine holding out against Russia and grinding it down to a kind of a stalemate, where enthusiasm and motivation and will to continue the warfare kind of drains away, and then it becomes a situation where you have to come to the negotiating table and negotiate something.
Right.
That's always been the case,
but it's
I think, from the beginning.
And it won't be because Russia couldn't vanquish Ukrainian forces.
No, of course not.
It'll be because of, well, let's go into the next thing that happened.
Yeah.
So those massive explosions were Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday afternoon, I couldn't believe when you told me. And I started looking at reports, and official report, Russia initially said they were accidents. 2 helicopters and 2 fighter jets were shot down inside Russia proper.
Yeah.
Some 60 kilometers back in. The Western reporting on this is that all 4 were on their way out over the border to conduct strikes somewhere in the Chernigov region in northern Ukraine. And they were shot down simultaneously. And I don't think that's just a boast. It does seem that all 4...
Within a short period
The
of time.
reporting, the Western reporting was that they were a pair of fighter jets, and what you typically would have is 2 Mi-8 helicopters behind them in case one is shot down and a rescue needs to be attempted.
Yeah. Well,
that's for what it's worth. That's the Western framing of what took place.
Yeah, throw the map back up there. So we just go to north of Kiev there, basically on the border into Russia. Yeah, a bit further over to the...
Further to your right, further east. We're somewhere north of Belgorod, right?
Yeah, Berdansk, the Berdansk region, yeah. So basically north of the Belgorod, in that area where those four roads meet, maybe just more to the right actually a little bit. Anyway, Berdansk region of Russia, and you see the border of the Ukraine along the bottom there. So basically you had you have an Su-34, Sukhoi 34, which is a bomber, and an Su-35, which was kind of protecting it effectively, which is the way they operate. They're flying over. Their goal is to fly down towards the Ukrainian border, to deal with as they have been on an ongoing basis, with incursions by Ukrainian troops, which has happened several times. Last year they took a couple of villages just over the border and all that kind of stuff, and then were pushed back out. So there's an ongoing problem for the Russians in terms of how to stop Ukrainian infiltrators, basically military infiltrators, coming into Ukraine or coming into Russia and messing around, basically causing a problem. So they have been bombing. There are rivers along there that are with bridges to cross the rivers that the Ukrainians would need to actually infiltrate into Russia. So this operation, what we're talking about, was an Su-34 bomber and an Su-35 kind of fighter jet that was there to protect it. The bomber was in their planning to attack various targets, whatever, just along the border there to stop these infiltrations. And on top of that, you have 2 Mi-8 helicopters, military helicopters. One of them reportedly a special kind of specially equipped military helicopter with basically jamming technology to jam within over a fairly wide area, jam radar or anti-aircraft radar or missile radar systems of Ukrainian to stop them, to basically suppress the fire, air defense fire, right? So
from the ground.
Yeah. And also the Su-35 is the jet there to protect in case any Ukrainian jet would come in and try and engage them, whatever. But primarily the two helicopters, one of them at least, was there to suppress the Ukrainian ability to detect these planes, to target these planes using air defense radar. But it didn't work. Basically, for some reason or other.
Just not work. It was obliterated.
How it didn't happen, how it happened, is still open to debate. My first thought was that they had basically put there's quite a few the American Patriot air defense systems in Ukraine, over Western Ukraine and various different parts of Ukraine. They had one stationed on the border, and they were able to detect these 4 aircraft, and they shot them down that way. Other people say that it could have been groups of Ukrainians infiltrated with Strela or Stinger, man-pad missiles and shot them down that way, or it could have been a combination of both, So it's hard to know. There's been no official word on what actually caused the shooting down and how it happened, but what we do know is that, like we said, 2 jets and 2 helicopters were shot down the day after, yeah.
That's the single worst loss of aircraft since this began. So you got to square this in your head, people, right? So on the one hand, the Ukrainians, they're reeling. They can't get enough fighters. They don't have enough weapons in most parts of the country. They don't have enough air defense system. You saw the uranium drones, the crappy little propeller drones, taking whatever they wanted in Kiev. They don't have the tech. And then you have to square that with this
Mm-hmm.
and ask yourself, is that Ukrainians who just caused the worst aviation results for Russia since this began a year and a bit ago? No, clearly not. And if it's just a solitary Patriot missile battery, holy shit, even that's way too impressive for one.
Well,
This was this was sophisticated, like 4 aircraft all at once inside Russia. That's you can see right there. It's not Ukraine versus Russia.
mm-hmm.
It's the best satellite, ISR, and tech the Pentagon and the Brits have to offer,
Yeah.
and the best operators of this tech.
Yep.
'Cause that's not Ukraine getting Russia. That's this is your World War III. It's happening by proxy swipes. It's still at the level of yanking on each other's beards. Yeah, but still, that's the worst aviation day.
Yeah. This is a
9
video.
people dead.
This is a video of and all the occupants were killed. So obviously there wasn't time for any evacuation or what do you call it, ejecting from the planes anyway. But this is a video of the helicopter, one of the helicopters getting hit. And you can actually see, if you zoom in on it, you can actually see a missile coming in. And it looks, I mean, it's hard to tell whether it's actually, go ahead, whether it's actually, there's no sound. That watermark's in the way, but you see a missile coming in from the left-hand side and hitting it. So, when they all happen on the same day, well, it's
I don't
obviously
think they're gloating, but
coordinated.
the British and New York Post both use the same term, simultaneous attack.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to believe them. And the Russians, well, so far they're eating it up and they're not making a big show of it. But
Not saying anything.
earlier in the week,
But again,
earlier in the
it's-
week,
People rationalize that. Well, of course, you have to rationalize that as war. You know what I mean? That's what happens. You know, and it's a relatively small detail, except in the sense that if it, you know, the Russian government has been explicit long before now that that they know that they're not fighting Ukrainians, they're fighting Americans and British, and they're NATO allies, but primarily the Americans. So they see this as American hardware, anti-aircraft hardware, fired from Ukraine into Russia, taking down Russian aircraft 4 in one day. And that's an escalation that hasn't happened before. You know, Russian planes or helicopters have been, relative few have been taken down over the course of the war inside Ukraine. And Russia has been very reluctant to use significant air power because it realizes that, okay, Ukraine doesn't have any innate or indigenous air defense and hasn't had it for a long time because a lot of it was destroyed, but it's been shipped in all the time. There's different types of anti-air. There's German, like I mentioned, the American Patriot missile system. There's German and German anti-aircraft missile systems shipped in as well. So they know that these things are coming in all the time, and they're not willing to just fly in and create, you know, air superiority basically over Ukraine, because they can't, basically, because they lose too many planes. So this is an escalation in that respect, where they have fired missiles into Russia at Russian aircraft. But the interesting thing is that it's like how
they want to provoke something
well,
from Russia.
it's not. I don't think they want to provoke. They're just pushing the line back. As time goes on, they test things and see how much they can get away with. See if they can push that supposed red line back a little bit. We're not past the red line. See what Russia does. Russia says nothing. They make an assessment. They wait a while. Then they push it a bit further and push it a bit further. Obviously, you know, and it's a smart way to go about it, because you see the response from Russia, see what happens. You give it a few weeks to see if there what kind of response Russia has, if any. If it doesn't, then you think of something else where you can push it, see how far you can push it further. You know, I mean, it could get to the point where you could have another attempted attack on the Crimean Bridge, especially with these new British-French Storm Shadow cruise missiles. And there's obviously other hardware that could be supplied, or ATACMS, ground-to-ground, basically missile systems that America has that could be provided even though they say they won't. But they've said that in the past. That we won't supply this, we won't supply that. But as time goes on, they see
Then
that
there are fighter jets. I think they're already there. I think they've already sent them.
it could well be. So
Yeah.
that's what's happening. They're just testing the limits and seeing what happens. And of course,
For a year, we've been going, where are those limits?
Yeah.
But
you can see how, from a narrative point of view, this is entirely justified, because what the West is supposedly doing in Ukraine is helping Ukraine to defend itself against evil, brutal, barbaric,
the little guy, the underdog.
Russian
Yeah.
aggression, right? And they're simply providing Ukraine with an opportunity to defend itself. Now, if these 4 aircraft, the 2 helicopters and the 2 jets, were planning to attack Ukraine in somewhere or other along the border, then shooting them down falls under the self-defense rule, right? That we were simply preventing an attack by Russian aircraft on Ukrainian positions, and that's self-defense.
Right.
So, and we didn't strike Russian territory, right?
Yeah, technically, no.
Well, there you go. See, that's the example of how they rationalize this and plan this out and think about it, and then say, well, does that fit within our narrative? Technically it does, so it's defense. So, yeah, I don't see why not.
Before now, drones have hit the airfield of the... begins with an E. Engels Air Force Base is like
Yeah.
a strategic nuclear
course.
site. That's even further
Yeah.
inside Russia proper.
Yeah, they've been doing it for quite a long time throughout it, so it's nothing new in that respect, you know. And this is just something that's most recent. These 4 aircraft that were shot down is just something that the Russians have to say, listen, well, okay, that's another piece of data that we're going to have to adjust to, and see how it goes. But yeah, again, they can frame everything as defense. You know what I mean? If Russia is the aggressor, then any attack on Russian infrastructure or supplies that is very specifically military can be seen as defense.
All these incidents we're talking about have happened since, but when it was first announced by the British MOD that they were going to supply longer range cruise missiles, the Russian Foreign Ministry, for what it's worth, gave a formal warning to the UK that Russia reserves the right to take any measures deemed necessary to neutralize a threat.
Blah, 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 yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. They described this as a reckless step, and that London's destructive activities in general would be to blame for the consequences.
Yeah.
We're all
Well,
waiting to see what those consequences are, but
Again,
there may not be any. The big explosion of material we saw, it doesn't follow sequentially, but that's an ongoing response, I suppose. They will just keep destroying it.
They would have done that anyway.
Right,
regardless.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, Russia. My sense is that Russia, regardless of what happens, you know, shooting down Russian aircraft, whatever, you know, infiltration into Russia, you know, bombing of the Crimean Bridge, you know, blah blah blah,
Sinking of the Moskva.
attacks on Crimea, is responded to by just stick to the plan. Carry on, stick to the plan, and the plan is
Trust the plan.
Trust the plan. Yeah,
Hugh
where's
is
Trump?
running Russia.
Exactly.
I knew it.
The plan's going to make
That's
it.
where he
And
is. He's in the Kremlin.
yeah, exactly.
Q, Trump, Kremlin. Yeah, it all
That's
makes
why
sense.
they hated
now.
him so much. Yeah, him, i.e. the CIA.
Do you get the impression this week that, well, actually, I'll say I got the impression this week that this cannot end up ever being anything other than a draw. Not so much because, I mean, Russia has already destroyed Ukraine's army 4 or 5 times over. I mean, they can keep doing that and doing that.
Forever.
But as long as you have sophisticated high tech that can come in, fit into Ukraine like a glove, and then smack anywhere in Russia it wants, that's what they're signaling. Look how specific we can be. We didn't technically hit Russia proper. We hit you up in the air. But we're also saying we could smack your cities. Given that the escalatory ceiling is beyond that, rapidly approaches MAD,
Yeah, but
then this can only ever be a draw.
exactly. Yeah, but so it won't. They won't go. They know Russia won't go to MAD, and you know the West isn't. You know, going to go to MAD, and they're using that against Russia, right? They're using the fact that Russia, for all its talk, isn't going to launch a nuclear war in the world, basically,
bluff.
right? So you just keep pushing it, and like I said earlier on, their goal is to deny Russia achieving what it has set out to achieve, and forcing it to a point where whatever gains they have made, that's all you're getting, and Ukraine is still technically kind of intact, except now entirely owned by Western interests, and militarily, economically, if not socially, owned by the West, and they see that as a win because, like, ultimately we've taken a big chunk of Ukraine. Ukraine is now firmly in the Western camp. You have, you liberated Donbass and you keep Crimea, but that's what you more or less had beforehand, and it hasn't really gone very well for you. You haven't really got what you achieved, or got what you intended to achieve. So, well, we're calling that a win, and Russia's been stood down basically in Ukraine. And that's the end of it. And then, eventually, some kind of negotiated agreement, settlement has to happen at some point. When that happens will depend on both parties involved, the US and Russia, based on their own criteria of how they want to settle it. And that'll be the end of it. And Russia will claim that it has achieved its objectives, and the US will achieve that it has achieved its objectives, and everybody will be left to go, that was a load of bullshit. That was all senseless. Although from our perspective, it wasn't senseless. I mean, our understanding of the Russian perspective on it is that it wasn't senseless, even if Russia only achieves, say, the line, the front line, or the gains territorial gains made by Russia were frozen at this point, and then they're frozen for the foreseeable future. Russia will probably see that as a victory, that it got what it wanted. Okay, it maybe had compromised a little bit on its ultimate goals, but it's a win because it has stood up to the West. It took what the West could try and throw at it, and it didn't back down. And there's a new world order was going to settle out of this, where America doesn't get to rule the day all the time, doesn't get to declare mission accomplished and have presidents in their crotch protecting straps, whatever, on aircraft carriers, and making glorious pronouncements about how they've won this war on terror, won this, or defeated the evil dictator, blah blah. It's going to be a lose for America anyway. But ultimately, that's just optics as well. That's just the propaganda,
It won't be a shocking loss for.
And they have a lot more.
A billion Westerners. It'll still look like, yeah, that's plausible. We won that. Yeah.
And they have
the world order is upheld. Blah blah blah.
They have a lot more. They have a lot of other issues they're dealing with. The Americans in particular, are dealing with right now as well. So there's lots of other stuff to take up the news, take up space on the news cycle.
Yeah.
More than Ukraine, in fact. If you look at the actual news cycle, Ukraine isn't exactly dominating it. In terms of American domestic news cycle.
Agreed.
There's immigrants and.
Before that sounds like you're about to segue onto something else. Someone asked, "Where's Zaluzhny?" Zaluzhny is, of course, the top commander of the Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, there were claims that he had been killed, but
I don't think so. There was a statement somehow discussed in Kievan media last week, which was cited by many people. This speaks to our topic last week. This spat between the head of Wagner. The boss of the financial boss of Wagner, Prigozhin, and Gerasimov, Shoigu. It sounded like he was the torrent of abuse directed at both of them as incompetent. Blah blah blah. Well, Zaluzhny said something last week, maybe on radio, that he totally respects Gerasimov. He says he is a genius military strategist.
No, I don't pay any attention to what's his name? Prigozhin. I don't pay any attention to him anymore. He's a bit of a blowhard, and I don't pay any attention to those theatrics. I don't think he's very. What he says is of any real significance. He'll just talk a lot of hyperbole, basically, and
to get what he wants.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. So people like losing their shit over that and getting worked up about it are just looking, they're looking a bit too intensely at it, and they're not seeing the bigger picture, But yeah, so like I was saying, the Americans have a lot more things on their other things on their plate to occupy them and to entertain them. This one, for example, is an example. Well, China, apart from domestic U.S. affairs, there's also China. And when are they going to have a war against China? Are they done with Ukraine yet? And when are you going to move on to China? And this is the Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen has a complaint and she's actually speaking to the Department of DNI, Department of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. We'll talk about her in a little minute, but just have a listen to this.
China has rapidly increased its engagement around the world. It includes actually trying to broker troubling agreements to reestablish diplomatic ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia, offering to broker peace deals between Ukraine and the Russian aggressors. So these incidents, they highlight China's persistent presence and intention to exert its influence and match the U.S. as a global power. So how can the U.S. address China's increasing involvement in global diplomatic matters? And can we expect to see more countries try to turn to China as a mediator? And what do you think the implications of this pivot would mean to us?
It ain't so.
Thank you, Senator. It's a very thoughtful question.
Very thoughtful, yeah.
Very thoughtful,
bunch of jokers. Like she's just saying, what are we going to do? China's trying to broker troubling agreements that involve like peace between long-term enemies. I mean, how do we stop this? You know, I mean, these people are so deluded. Like, I mean, they obviously can't hear themselves. And they're in such an echo chamber that she doesn't hear herself bringing up in the Senate to the Director of National Intelligence the big problem for America of one of the other major world countries brokering peace deals in historic conflict zones in the world and establishing diplomatic ties between, for example, Iran and Saudi Arabia. How do we stop that from happening? Because that's a horrible thing. These people should be at each other's throats. They have been for a very long time. And we've done very well out of them being at each other's throats for a long time. And now China's trying to make them friends. And how do we stop that from happening? And, you know, this is all in the context of freedom and democracy, right? Because that's what America's all about. It's about spreading peace and love and freedom and democracy around the world. And the way that we do that is to prevent other countries from brokering peace deals between warring parties. Do you understand that? Do I sound like a complete fucking idiot? Yes, I do. Can I hear myself? No. Should anybody be listening to me? No. But they are. Should CNN and other media report on the fact that I'm, you know, literally full of shit? I mean, I'm talking no sense. I'm making no sense whatsoever. Like, I'm talking like a warmongering country. And should CNN be actually presenting it that way? Yes. Do they present it that way? No. How do they present it? They present it as America trying to preserve peace and security in the world by preventing other countries from securing peace and security. You see, it all makes a lot of sense if your head's up your ass like it is, like hers is. You know, it's completely rational.
Right. What you want her to say is, so Director Haines, after spending decades funding first one side and then the other in Middle Eastern wars, how in the hell did that come to an end? We were on a good thing there, you know. We give money and weapons to Saddam Hussein, and then we give them to Iran.
Which is what she's saying, basically.
Bases in Saudi Arabia.
You don't have to read too deeply between the lines to hear that's actually what she's saying. She's complaining about peace deals between long-term, you know, warring factions in major countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iran. How do we stop China from encouraging them to be friends? Because, like, there'll be no more war in the Middle East, no more conflict in the Middle East. That's horrible.
It's horrible. We wouldn't be able to dominate people.
Yeah.
We like dominating people. America. It's funny that she thinks China is the biggest threat because Biden said this week that the most dangerous threat to the USA is white supremacy.
Well, yeah, it is. Of course it is.
That's a WTF moment. At least you can kind of guess what she's alluding to, but he's saying that Biden's saying that people like me as in Biden, not me, that it's just that's the height of, like, that argument has just come to the end of the road for it, basically. And he's not the first person to say that, of course. There's Mark Milley who said that as well on the record in Congress, saying that the most dangerous threat to the United States is white supremacy. What the fuck? There's something that happened last week that I think could be the next. I think we're a couple of steps down the road towards the U.S. coming to some kind of standoff with China. And that is that there was a tit-for-tat expulsion of diplomats between Canada and China last week.
Mm-hmm.
That reminded me of like 10 years ago. That's how it began with Russia. The Obama administration kicked out and shut down a consulate or two at a school or something
Mm-hmm.
in Washington or Washington State. I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it begins.
Yeah.
You start expelling diplomats
Right.
under some pretext. The bullshit was Canada expelled a Chinese diplomat because he was, quote, bullying a conservative Canadian Chinese MP. The bit they left out is that this MP was like all over propaganda, the lie about China's Uyghur oppression, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and he was trying to lobby him to, you know, come on.
Yeah.
But supposedly, because he still had family back in China, that the Chinese regime was putting pressure on his family back home. Anyway, so Canada declared this diplomat persona non grata. China has since responded in the same week. That's a very un-Chinese thing. Like Russia, you know, we've gotten used to Russia going, okay, we'll give as good as we get.
Mm-hmm.
We'll fire one too. We'll send him home too.
Mm-hmm.
But China doing that, like there's no more cute panda. Like, you know, it's panda with claws now at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's the next step on the road to showdown. We've spoken, but we don't think it's actually going to come to much like the way Ukraine did. But the rhetoric and the insanity about it will, for sure.
Yeah. And then, I mean, we talked about this last week, but here's maybe you can see this. Again, talking about American domestic issues, Jesus. This relates to the Hunter Biden laptop and the revelation that, you know, apparently wasn't such a big deal, that as this Wall Street Journal, it's an opinion piece, but even the Wall Street Journal has an opinion piece that says that that is titled Biden's CIA Assist in the 2020 Presidential Election. The agency, not only retirees, turns out to have worked on the Hunter excuse letter. So, obviously, most people know this is the kind of alternate universe story to the Russiagate story with Trump,
Right.
right? Where and Russia interfering in our elections and colluding with Trump to interfere in our elections in 2016 and basically stealing the election in cahoots with Russia and denying Clinton the presidency, and how that dominated the airwaves and everybody, you know, got their knickers in a twist repeatedly for forever, and we all vomited at the amount of, you know, the nausea that it produced, just incessant nonsense about it. And at the time, most people with any sense were aware that this was propaganda. It was being made up entirely, right?
Yeah.
And
it was so bad we were relieved when COVID came along.
Right. And
Something else to talk about.
so this is what happens in the alternate universe whenever you have, so in the phony clown shoes reality we live in, you can make up a story about Trump colluding with Russia to steal the presidential election, and everybody loses their shit, and there's no evidence, obviously, because you just made it up, and it's obvious that you made it up at the time, but a lot of people seem to believe it, and all the mainstream media runs with it. But in the alternate, more sane universe, which we're getting a glimpse into here, if this was the actual dominant reality, what actually happened in the 2020 election was that the CIA and 51 current and former members of the U.S. intelligence community deliberately interfered in the 2020 election in the form of knowingly lying about Hunter Biden's laptop and the contents of his laptop, which implicates obviously not only Hunter Biden, but at that time, presidential candidate Joe Biden, who is now president, implicates him in serious corruption and money laundering and pay for access schemes and all that kind of stuff. Serious corruption that would have disqualified him in anybody's eyes. I don't know if legally, but certainly he would not have been able to. He wouldn't have won that election if most people knew about it, but they were denied, most people in America were denied, and around the world were denied knowledge of the extent of the Biden family corruption because the CIA, American intelligence, directly interfered in it to shut it down and claim that it was all Russian propaganda and it was lies, and give Biden those talking points and made it go away so that he could win the election. So they basically, like this Wall Street Journal opinion says, it was the CIA assisted him, but effectively secured him the election by directly interfering in the democratic process in America. And nobody says a fucking word about it, except, most of the mainstream media ignores this story, has ignored this story. It's not a big deal. You won't see this story covered on CNN or MSNBC, etc., etc. And the only thing that happens is, okay, to their credit, Republicans in Congress, particularly Jim Jordan, are investigating, have been investigating it, and are publishing the facts about it. But apparently, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't change anything. Unlike in Trump's case, where it produces impeachment proceedings and gets him, roundly trashed by everybody in America supposedly, and everybody around the world thinks Trump is this evil colluding Russian election hacking rapist person, and there's no evidence for any of that. But when the evidence comes up that that's actually describing Biden, there's crickets.
Yeah.
So
Well,
how does that work?
I think
Explain that to me.
Bobby Kennedy said it in another podcast last week. Most Americans are afraid of the CIA.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer said the quiet part out loud. They have 6 ways from Sunday to get you. And that affects everyone personally, especially if you have any influence in media or in Washington.
Well, here's
They're scared. They're scared of the spooks.
Here's a little announcement about it, basically, about their investigation from this group of Republican members of Congress, and Jim Jordan are on the right as well. Just have a listen.
Biden was lecturing Romania on anti-corruption policies. In reality, he was a walking billboard for his son and family to collect money. Hunter Biden and his associates capitalized on a lucrative financial relationship with a Romanian national who was under investigation for and later convicted of corruption in Romania. The Bidens received over $1 million for the deal. And 16 of the 17 payments to their associates' account that funneled the Bidens' money occurred while Joe Biden was vice president. In fact, the money stops flowing from the Romanian national soon after Joe Biden leaves the vice presidency. This is a pattern of influence peddling. This appears separate from any payment Hunter received from his work connecting this individual to a U.S. law firm. We'll also provide further information regarding the Bidens' relationship with China. This includes 2 individuals the committee is particularly concerned about. One of them, Xi Jinping, had close ties to the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party and operated a multi-billion-dollar energy company with access to large sums of money. We'll discuss how the Bidens received millions of dollars from this individual through the use of shell companies and wire transfers. In March, the committee released its first bank records memorandum that showed a Biden associate, Rob Walker, used his company to funnel money from the Chinese to various Biden family members. Democrats dismissed the evidence, even though it was based on bank records directly from the bank. The Democrats on the Oversight Committee received the same records as the Republicans, and they were able to verify the information. Democrats said all the bank records showed were Papa John's and Starbucks receipts. They deliberately chose to misconstrue and deny what was clearly in front of them. Hunter Biden's representatives claimed the money was, quote, good faith seed funds, but could not explain why those funds had to go through an intermediary in what appears to be an attempt to hide the transfers from the Chinese. They also couldn't explain why the Bidens received over $1 million in 16 different wire transfers over a period of 3 months to at least 5 different banks.
Totally legit. And here's just to follow up, here's Jim Jordan speaking specifically about some of those details. I think as part of that, the discourse.
Suspicious activity reports. The key word in that phrase is the word suspicious. There are 170 of those reports, many of them put together by the Treasury Department of our government in the Obama-Biden administration. So 170 of those that the committee has reviewed, thousands of pages of bank records the committee has reviewed, and that has told us that there are now multiple, as Mr. Donald just said, multiple LLCs receiving money from foreign entities and paying that money out to multiple members of the Biden family. And the fundamental question is the one Byron just raised. For what? What did they do? What was the business? What service did they provide? What value did they add? What did they do to warrant receipt of the money? That is the fundamental question, and no one seems to have an answer to that fundamental question.
For stuff.
But Mr. Comer, Chairman Comer, and the team, that's what we're looking into, trying to get. And I would just say this, too. Why not just come clean? Why not just be honest with us?
He's the president.
Why not tell us the truth? But I would tell you this. I think it's a pattern with this administration. They haven't been square with us, straight with the American people about anything. They tell us the border is secure. We know it isn't. They tell us our debt ceiling bill is going to hurt veterans. No, it doesn't. Joe Biden said during the campaign that the letter from 51 former intel officials, when he used it in the debate, he portrayed it as if it was organic. And we now know through another investigation that we're all working on that, in fact, it was coordinated. That letter from 51 former intel officials was coordinated with the Biden campaign. So much so, the Biden campaign told Mike Morrell, here's the journalist we want you to have the story to, the letter to first. Why not just be straight with us? Why not come clean? Why not tell us the truth? Tell the American people the truth. They deserve that from their government. Again, the fundamental question is, what did they do to warrant the receipt of millions and millions of dollars? Why did Joe Biden's brother? Why did Joe Biden's sister-in-law? Why did Joe Biden's son? Why did so many family members get the money? What did they do to warrant receipt of that money? That's the fundamental question. Chairman Comer and the team have done great work, and they're determined to get answers to those fundamental questions.
So, like, the short version is coming up to the 2020 election, Biden against Trump. Hunter Biden's laptop in a drug-addled state. He forgets his laptop, leaves it there a few months previously. Somebody gets a hold of it. Look, the guy who left it with gets a hold of it, and the information on it is, released in one way or another. And the Biden campaign are aware of this. They say, listen, this looks bad. That laptop has a lot of information on it about our really dodgy, corrupt, illegal dealings using the offices of the vice president to enrich me and my family members through corrupt deals with other countries. This would totally disqualify me from the election, essentially, from winning the election. What are we going to do about it? This is bad. Tell you what, let me call this Biden and his team. Let's call the intelligence agency heads, the intelligence agency itself, the CIA, FBI probably as well, and all of the previous guys that weren't in good standing, 51 of them. Let's get them all together. Okay, let's talk to them. And so we talk to them. We say, listen, guys, this is bad. Here's the situation. We're caught. Our balls are hanging out the window here on this one. We're going to go down for corruption. It's not going to look good.
Trump's going to win.
Trump's going to win. What do we do about it? And the guys say, well, listen, we'll just what do you reckon? Maybe call it Russian propaganda. Say the laptop's Russian or something. It was a Russian laptop with Russian stuff on it, and it's nothing to do with Biden, and it's just Russian agents trying to interfere in our election. What about that? Does that sound good? Yeah. Actually, that's a really good idea. You guys go ahead, put a letter together, and you know what? Here's a list of the journalists that I want you to give that letter that you're making up to, so that they can run the story. And don't worry about them, because they're on board as well, right? So basically, Biden, crony capitalist Biden family, in league with the CIA, fully on board, in bed, and with most of the media, all conspiring to prevent information about how corrupt Biden and his whole clique are from getting out to the public, so that he can be president, despite him being a corrupt asshole and probably a pedophile. So
what you're saying is there's a vast conspiracy.
Sort of.
But Joe, somebody would talk.
Yeah, somebody would talk. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. You run with that one. You go with that. See how far
You
get.
said conspiring.
I know. Yeah. Nobody conspires. Yeah.
No one ever.
Nobody ever gets in a room and sits down and talks about things. It's ridiculous. What kind of fucking tin hat nut jobbery is that? Getting together, talking about how to sort out their problems, and using their influence and leverage to make sure those problems get solved. Nobody ever does that, Neil. You nut job. Go and, get into a fetal position in the corner there and rock back and forth with your tinfoil hat on, you nutty person. Anyway, meanwhile, this week, Trump, the loopy, I don't know what to call Trump. He was, for some reason, CNN decided to host a town hall.
Oh, wait, before that, you got to talk about the fact that Trump was finally convicted of rape.
Oh, was he? That just blew past me. I'm like, what? Whatever.
This is mental. People have probably seen, if you haven't, go and watch the Jimmy Dore summary video on this. It's just 10 minutes long. Yeah, so it's been a long week for CNN types and Trump. Obviously, it ended bad. We'll get to that in a minute. But it began with a win. They got headlines out in the US and internationally that Trump had been convicted of sexual battery or abuse of a woman in the 1990s. Not rape. The jury, I think it was in New York. This is separate from the DA's case about, Jesus, what's that one about? Oh, improper use of campaign funds. That's another one. This is
That
one
was
where
Stormy Daniels, yeah.
Stormy Daniels payment, hush money, right?
That's not something that'll get on.
No, I can't hang. But they got something. He got him here. They got him convicted, in quotes. He has to pay damages to her. The insane thing about this case that Jean Carroll makes the claim that this happened in the mid-1990s. Normally, any claim for sexual assault is thrown out. It doesn't even make it in front of a judge. It's thrown out on its merits because it's a statute of limitations. It's well past. But this woman and her lawyer were on TV boasting after the successful declaration in her favor that the law was changed in 2022 in the state of New York, specifically for 1 year. It wasn't going to be that the law was changed forever after, but for 1 year only, there would be zero limits on the statute of limitations.
So
anyone could come forward, and the only one who comes forward has a claim against Donald Trump. And that's it. The window now is about to close, and the law will revert back. They changed the law temporarily just to get this case going. Even then, the jury, which probably hated Trump, New York jury, still didn't convict him on the main charges. But because it's a civil suit, he does have to pay damages up to $5 million.
Nobody can appeal.
Exactly. That may not be the end of it. But all it gave them was the headlines for 24 hours. Trump convicted sexual molestation / battery. Finally, after 6 years, he is a rapey bastard.
Except her thing all these years was that he raped her, and that was not proven. They said that he was not convicted of rape. Obviously, anybody with any sense, seeing how this is operating, there's also the fact that her whole case, her legal fees for this entire case was bankrolled by a Democrat, a mega donor to the DNC, to the Democrat Party.
George Soros?
No, a guy called Bergdorf Goodman.
He's a founder of LinkedIn or something.
Right.
That's one of the tech companies.
So it's obviously a political
hit job.
A political hit job, basically, yeah.
And then I think CNN thought, we got him nailed to the mast now. And that's when the town hall took place.
Right.
And it didn't go as they planned.
Yeah, which is weird. I mean, it's almost like they're just doing it because they're not serious about any of these claims. It's just to keep the population in thrall, keep them divided, keep
a cloud hanging over Trump.
Well, no, over the population. When CNN willingly provides a platform for Trump, and part of the deal, I think, that people say anyway, that the audience was going to were Republican Trump supporters, basically, so they would have...
Because of the town that was picked.
Right. But anyway, so they allowed him to do that. I mean, otherwise, they surely knew how this was going to go, that Trump was going to push back against this and be typical Trump, right? So they gave him a platform to do that. which is weird because it obviously provides more drama for this crappy reality TV show that we're watching, and CNN is benefiting from it in terms of viewership. So they're not serious about any of their claims about evil Trump, must stop Trump at all costs, blah, 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 or otherwise they wouldn't be giving him a platform. You know what I mean? They could easily just not give him a platform. In today's extreme, partisan political atmosphere, they have long since dispensed with any idea of impartiality. So why would they bother giving him a platform other than to get them attention? Which means that they have no integrity and they're not serious about evil Trump at all, except to the extent that you need both sides, right? You need to have them saying evil Trump, he's such a bad man. Oh, let's let him respond and keep everybody entertained while we bank it, right? And we keep you all distracted and ignorant about what's really going on here, But anyway, this is him. Not that one actually, Scotty. Did I send you one? Do the one beforehand. Yes, do that one.
He was a newscaster, a very nice man. She called him an ape. Happens to be African American. Called him an ape. The judge wouldn't allow us to put that in. Her dog or her cat was named Vagina. The judge wouldn't allow to put that in. All of these things but with her, they can put in anything. Access
this
Hollywood.
This was a jury of 9 people who found you liable of sexual abuse. Do you think that will deter women from voting for you?
No, I don't think so, because I think the whole thing, just so you understand, ready? I never met this woman. I never saw this woman. This woman said, I met her at the front door of Bergdorf Goodman, which I rarely go into other than for a couple of charities. I met her in the front door. She was about 60 years old. And this is like 22, 23 years ago. I met her in the front door of Bergdorf Goodman. I was immediately attracted to her, and she was immediately attracted to me. And we had this great chemistry. We're walking into a crowded department, so we had this great chemistry, and a few minutes later we end up in a room, a dressing room, at Bergdorf Goodman, right near the cash register. And then she found out there were locks on the door, so she said, I found one that was open. She found one. She learned this at trial. She found one that was open. What kind of a woman meets somebody and brings them up, and within minutes you're playing hanky-panky in the dressing room, okay? I don't know if she was married then or not. John Johnson, I feel sorry for you, John Johnson.
Mr. President, can I ask you this?
Think of it.
I know you're recounting what she said, but Mr. President.
Let me just, if I could, because you asked the question,
This was a
just so
jury,
you understand,
though.
if I was walking in at the bar, because I was very famous then, and I owned the Plaza Hotel right next door, and I owned buildings around it, I'm not going into a dressing room of a crowded department store. Then I say, if she was being raped, and by the way, they said she wasn't raped. Okay, that was her charge. It wasn't.
They found that you sexually abused her.
What? Say what? They did. They said he didn't rape her, and I didn't do anything else either. You know what? Because I have no idea who the hell she is.
But Mr. President, can I ask you, given your recounting?
So yeah, that's Trump. I mean, that's obviously what the way he was gonna go. I mean, they focused on him enough over the past. How long is it now? 7 years, to know that that's what he is, but that's the way he goes about things. But it was a longer, I don't know how long it was, a couple of hours, whatever. But there's this part here as well on which exposes how the U.S. media thinks about Ukraine and stuff, just the inanity of it. And he at least, it is a bit of real statesmanship,
Question is, would you give Ukraine weapons
I was
and
impeached
funding?
by a crazy woman named Nancy Pelosi.
But the question here is, would you give Ukraine weapons and funding if you were
I would
elected?
sit down. Let me just put it a nicer way. If I'm president, I will have that war settled in 1 day, 24 hours.
How would you settle that war in 1 day?
Because I'll meet with Putin, I'll meet with Zelensky. They both have weaknesses and they both have strengths. And within 24 hours, that war will be settled. It'll be over. It'll be absolutely
Do you
over.
want Ukraine to win this war?
I don't think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of getting it settled so we stop killing all these people and breaking down this country. Now,
can I just follow up on that? You
But
said
one
you
of the
don't
things
think
you
in
have
terms
to
of
do is
winning
you have
and
to get
losing.
you have
Mr.
to get
President, can I
Europe.
just follow up on that because that's a really important
Excuse me,
statement
let me
that you
just
just
follow
made
up.
there. Can you say if you want Ukraine or Russia to win this war?
I want everybody to stop dying. They're dying, Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying. And I'll have that done. I'll have that done in 24 hours. I'll have it done. You need the power of the presidency to do it.
I mean, that idiot CNN person, like, it's like a sports game to her, you know? It's like, do you want, can you just say which team you want to win here in this tonight's match? You know? I mean, 'cause
And
that's
then
all it is to
he
me.
explicitly says,
I want people to stop
It's not
dying.
about winning. But on that point, who do you want to win? He just said, but her story. So you look at her and you go, okay, she's CNN. She must be a libtard. She obviously has knives out for Trump. She began her shtick about 10 years ago on Fox affiliates, ranting and raving about George Soros,
Right.
funding everyone on the left.
Right.
These people are just, who do you take seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Trump has proven, because he's gone, even there you have difficulty taking him seriously because of the games, the kind of the game show host that comes out all the time. But still he's proven through all the shit he's taken in 6 years and his continued dedication to do something right.
Mm-hmm.
You can take him seriously, ironically.
Yeah.
Libtards will never be able
No.
to, because they've been programmed to hate him, but
They're also, I mean, especially media anchors, media journalists, so-called journalists and stuff, they have no integrity. They're doing it simply for attention. They don't care what they're talking about. She doesn't care about which side she supports or doesn't support or whatever. She just talks about the current thing and pushes in your face in order to get people to read her newspaper or pay for clicks on her newspaper. Because that's her mandate as an employee of that organization is to make money. And it doesn't matter how you make money, just make the money. We don't care. We don't have any integrity. They don't have any integrity at all.
yeah.
But people still think they do. People still think they're getting the truth or some approximation to the truth when they read CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News. At least on Fox News, at least with Tucker Carlson, you got a decent dose of truth. But even now, Fox News is just like almost as bad. It's just our side versus your side. It's a sports game to them. They don't care about, and they talk about the poor people of Ukraine, but they don't give two shits about the poor people of Ukraine, because it's they and their media organization and their government that are directly responsible for any deaths in Ukraine today over the past year. Yeah, and then I mean, as an example,
You talk,
I meant to throw this in actually, just on that what's her face and and this isn't just from RT, the woman who's talking about China and the horror of China brokering peace deals between long-term warring factions, and what are we going to do to stop this? This is a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers. So bipartisan group has introduced a bill to oppose the normalization of relations between Syria and other nations.
right.
So
That's
Syria
because
Syria
back
was
in the Arab
reinstated
League.
in the Arab League, and that was horrible. And they're threatening, U.S. lawmakers are threatening countries like Saudi Arabia, other Arab countries, Middle Eastern countries, that do not normalize relations with Syria, because there might be peace in the region, and then that would leave America out, because America profits from conflict and war and death. So anything that goes in the opposite direction is extremely bad for us, and we will threaten you with economic sanctions and anything else we can dream up if you push in this direction, which is again is the Chinese and Russian agenda of a multipolar world where people live peaceably, and America doesn't go around the world anymore starting fires and creating conflict. And Americans are very unhappy about this.
Certain Americans.
American politicians.
Yeah.
Some American politicians are very unhappy about it. So,
Yeah. That's Syria. Syria and Turkey are in talks to normalize their border situation.
Right.
That would basically end the war, because that's the main sticking point at this point.
right.
The Kurdish issue / the border issue, where there's still pockets of ISIS types living in Idlib province. And on Turkey, there's a major election in Turkey today. I say major because it's every 5 years, but Erdogan has won everything since 2000 and God knows when. But
Before we get into that, there's just two small items. One is this one, which was the leaks. You know those leaks from that young guy, the Navy guy, a few weeks ago, where we learned about how the US were spying on everybody and how the situation in Ukraine wasn't going very well, etc., etc. Well, those leaks were like, there were hundreds of pages associated. I don't know if they put them all on him, but associated with that leak, and hundreds of pages of documents. This is from one. Well, it's a report on one of them, and it's just, I thought it was interesting. In a meeting in mid-February with Deputy Prime Minister Zelensky suggested that Ukraine could blow up the Soviet-built Druzhba pipeline that provides oil to Hungary. Zelensky highlighted that Ukraine should just blow up the pipeline and destroy likely Hungarian Viktor Orban's industry, which is based heavily on Russian oil.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm a bit suspicious about this.
Well, look,
Go on, what's your thoughts?
That's part of those leaks, but I mean, my point in there's no reason to disbelieve it. It certainly fits with maybe not Zelensky himself, but certainly with the thinking in Ukraine to blow up pipelines. But still, you're not allowed to say that America or anybody associated with America would blow up pipelines, blow up Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, right? But, actual US classified documents cite the fact that as part of discussions, Zelensky was talking about blowing up oil pipelines because it's, it would be good for Ukraine. It would be good for Ukraine and bad for our enemies.
This is why I think this is. I'm starting to think more and more that these leaks are a workaround. They're the US having information leaked in quotes over there, so that it looks like it's coming from others. If you look at the headline, the Washington Post headline about this leak, this title: Zelensky, commas, in private, plots bold attacks inside Russia, comma, leak shows. The subheadline: the Discord leaks, like it's a thing, right?
Right.
Why the hell didn't we hear about this when they first came out? I think
there are hundreds of pages of documents.
Right, and the Washington Post is judiciously, I don't believe that at all. Washington Post is basically a CIA post. So this is the CIA, this is my take on it, this is the CIA saying, these are the kind of things we're thinking of doing. Yeah. Blowing up that pipeline to get Hungary to behave, just as we did in Nord Stream. Right. So it's a workaround. And then they have Zelensky's face, like it's so pinning in on him. He's such a useful avatar now for everything. Money laundering, CIA schemes. It's because otherwise, what you have to square that with, this is the Washington Post being honest and truthful. Just spontaneously wants everyone to know how mad that Zelensky is. That Zelensky they're funding.
Except on the idea that it's actually the CIA or the US State Department who's coming up with these ideas, and obviously they blew up Nord Stream 1 and 2, the CIA, in collaboration with their NATO friends and stuff. But anything Zelensky comes up with, or anything Ukraine is said to be planning to do or thinking about doing, that is by definition American as well. I mean, Ukraine isn't doing anything at this point that isn't more or less rubber stamped or even, kind of fabricated or made up, thought of by someone in Washington DC. You know what I mean? So in that sense, of course, you need to know that to read that into that. But when you hear that Zelensky was talking about blowing up a pipeline, well, yeah, I mean, if it happened, then it would have happened with the approval of the US State Department and the CIA. And then this week he was flying around just talking about that little cokehead. He's flying around Europe. Interesting, out of the country.
Yeah, again
when attacks occur on, escalation of attacks. Like last week it was the drone attack on the Kremlin, and then this week shooting down 4 Russian aircraft over Russia. Zelensky's nowhere to be seen, at least in Ukraine. And where is he? He's doing a tour of Europe, drumming up support.
At the Vatican.
And he's at the Vatican. He was in Germany today as well. He left the Vatican yesterday, I think it went to Germany. But in the Vatican, look what he presented the Pope with. The Pope is praying for peace, but here's what he presented the Pope with. Body armor with the image of the Virgin Mary.
Right.
So it was a bulletproof vest used by a Ukrainian soldier, which was later painted with the image of the Virgin Mary. He said, "Here you go, Francie. This will be right up your street. I know you're talking about peace and all that kind of stuff, but look, does this not stir some kind of bloodlust within you?"
Is it meant to look blood spattered?
Probably.
it does.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
You freaks.
Yeah, that's what he presented the Pope. It's like, it's like a nice mixture. He's got a gift for everybody, for every occasion, whoever tailored to each person. And this one, obviously the Pope, it's like, I know you're all about peace and stuff, but couldn't you get a bit kind of militant? Couldn't you be a bit kind of, couldn't you give some more stronger words, like call the Russians bloody, brutal barbarians destroying, Ukrainian manhood? I mean, couldn't you do that? I mean, look again at the gift I just gave you. It's the Virgin Mary. She's on board with it.
Yeah.
So why aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Turkey. Go to Turkey.
Yeah. Then he met Maloney, and
Yeah.
God, what a turncoat she turned out to be. And now, he was in Germany.
Faffing around Germany and then be back to Ukraine.
Turkey. Yeah.
Snort
No,
some
I
more
just point out, but we can't tell. I mean, election day is today in Turkey. Polls and media chatter about it that it's going to be very close.
Except Western media covering of it is
I'm surprised by
they're
that.
apoplectic with the possibility. They're salivating, at least the establishment media in the West is salivating at the idea that Erdogan will be out.
Yeah, which
Because
tells you that they want him
he's,
out.
he's an evil dictator, right? And they have to tolerate him because he's Turkey's a member of NATO and stuff. But I mean, this from back in it's from the New York Times, and it was in 2020. This is Biden saying to a reporter, as reported in the New York Times, "Yeah, I spent a lot of time with him, Erdogan. He's an autocrat. He's the president of Turkey and a lot more. What I think we should be doing is taking a very different approach to him now, making it clear that we support opposition leadership. He has a price to pay." And he goes on to say that we need to embolden the opposition to be able to take on and defeat Erdogan. That's 3 years ago. That's Biden 3 years ago, making it pretty clear what they...
Don't forget that in 2016, they tried to oust him in a coup and kill him, supposedly.
And Erdogan's opposition, who's another... He's not some young, virile... fresh-faced image of a new Turkey, a new liberal, youthful, woke Turkey, right? He's 76, I think. People are calling him Papi, Grandpa, shouting Grandpa at him and stuff as a term of endearment. But he's pretty clear. I mean, obviously he's opposition, so he has to be the opposite of what Erdogan is all about. And this is from the Wall Street Journal today. Or not today, in the last few days. Turkey's top election challenger pledges closer ties to NATO and the EU. So he said he will, and he has also recently threatened Russia, saying, you better stop, we know the Russians are involved in spreading memes and disinformation about this election, you better stop it, blah, 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 blah. So he's the West man, and, he's probably being funded and supported in whatever way they can by the West, by Washington. And they want Erdogan out because Erdogan ultimately is a populist. And that's what they don't like about him. And Erdogan has been very clear that, he wants to balance the interests of everybody in the region. He's very much, in his talking points, he's very much in line with Russian and Chinese worldview, which is basically multipolarity, balance of interests. Everybody gets a fair share and everybody is happier and better off as a result. Of course, America doesn't see it that way because, and rightfully so, if everybody else, a lot of other countries around the world started getting a fair share, America would have to take a cut, and that might be a fatal cut for America, given the way that it's positioned itself economically. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, if it's close, it goes to the second round.
Right.
It's an interesting divide because it's basically bringing to the fore in Turkey the same kind of overall left-right divide you have in the West.
Right.
Because this other guy he harkens back to secular Turkey.
Right.
Tends to be lefty, liberal, pro-West. It's interesting how they both wrapped up their last photo op Erdogan goes to the Sophia Hagia Mosque in Istanbul for prayers, where he's, turns into a political rally basically. And the other guy goes to like commemoration of the birthplace of Kemal Ataturk,
Right,
the founder
Kurds.
of,
Secular socialist.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Just so here's a headline, couldn't be any clearer. This isn't Erdogan just messaging either. He's telling his supporters, quote, "Biden is trying to topple me."
Yeah.
So he's pretty sure he's going to win, and that will be a response to Biden too.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what about that COVID then? What about the COVID, Neil?
What about it?
Do you not remember?
No, that's ancient history.
It's
now.
ancient history now. You just let sleeping dogs lie. Don't mention the COVID.
There's a clip from something else Biden said this week. It's just an aside. I'm not even going to play it. But he promised serious problems to the whole world if the U.S. defaults on its public debt.
Mhm.
The
Media's
thing is,
been all over that, yeah.
people are reposting that, going, there's different. They have different takes on it, but the thing is, it's essentially true. I think everyone around him in Washington, in the know, knows this. This is what gives them their swagger and their confidence.
Mhm.
There can't be. This is an impossible problem, and they know it, and they will capitalize, no pun intended, on the fact of it. It's like the Samson option, only there's no nukes involved here. This is financial collapse. It's not just other countries cannot band together and just say, we're taking down the dollar. They would need the dollar to come down gradually.
Mhm.
And the Americans are like, no, we're going to just keep printing and printing and
Yeah.
printing.
We're going. Yeah. Well, the media's been all over that statement. I mean, it has, and obviously Biden said it, and he's got it directly from his intel chiefs. Biden doesn't come up with an original thought himself, right? Because he can barely string a sentence together, right? So it's when you say Biden said this, it's the intel agencies and Washington D.C. deep state who said this. Like, it's just an example from CBC, but it's this again, Avril Haines woman. Who again? She was on that. The senator was addressing her. She's the director of national intelligence, and she was addressing the senator was addressing her about what we're going to do about these other countries, China in particular, brokering peace around the world. What a horrible idea! How are we going to stop that? And she was also front and center in the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story and the cronyism and the corruption amongst the Biden family. And here she is saying that. Russia and China we cannot let debt default happen, i.e. the fact that America is living massively, has been for a long time, way beyond its means and has massive debt and can't support that debt except through war and conflict. We need to, rather than actually tighten our belts and, adopt some kind of pragmatic and responsible fiscal policy and stop spending so much and stop creating chaos around the world, we need to approve increase the debt ceiling, keep printing the money, go into further debt, because if you don't, Russia and China are going to exploit it. And in fact, they may actually be responsible for our debt. I think Russia and China have actually been like putting zeros on the end of our debt numbers, possibly. They hacked into the Treasury Department and added a lot of zeros onto our national debt. Yeah. So it's Russia and China. I mean,
that may be a headline in the next year or two.
Anything that's going wrong with America is Russia and China,
Right?
Because America is just so awesome and amazing. If you just look at it, everything going on in America is wonderful. America's a wonderful society. It's impeccable. Their value system and the way they live their lives and the way Americans live their lives and their outlook on the world and how informed the population is. It's just so awesome. They're like a shining city on a hill, So anything that bad that's happening in America must be an attack by our enemies, right?
And they've been doing this for a while. That's what Russiagate
forever.
was. Russiagate is paranoid response to the growing self-awareness that there's chaos in our country. Right, it's coming from without.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like an insane person. It's an extremely deluded / insane person who engages in that and doubles down on it every time. America is like in a really bad state, you know. I mean, every country has their problems, but America, from the perception of the American leadership and the American elite and political elite, most of them as represented to the people by the media, and then the way in which the media attempt to impose or encourage that delusion amongst the population, America stands alone as being in a really bad situation, you know, and it's happening in a way that, you know, it's an illusion. So as long as they can keep that illusion going, the rot happening behind the scenes can be covered up. But at a certain point, it gets too much to cover up anymore, and suddenly the whole thing collapses very quickly. But and it's worse, you know what I mean? If your life was going down the toilet, but you had the means to pretend it wasn't to everybody else and yourself, then you're just going to continue down that slippery, dark slope to your life being a real complete shit show. But you're able to keep up appearances until one day
there is a threshold. The
curtain is pulled back, and the contrast between what you've said you are and what people now see that you are and have been for quite a long time is just so shocking. It's like it can't sustain itself. It falls apart. There's just collapse, you know.
There was a clip you played earlier about, was that a U.S. senator or representative going, what are we doing about China making peace deals?
That was Senator Avril Haines, to the Director of National Intelligence.
Right. Here's another clip. Clearly, the spooks are having words with senators and representatives on a daily basis because they keep slipping out the grand schemes and where they want to go next. This is from this week. U.S. House of Reps Seth Moulton. Have a listen to what he said at some think tank.
Very clear to the Chinese that if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC. I just throw that out not because that's necessarily the best strategy, but because it's an example of this out there. And of course, the Taiwanese really don't like this idea.
I'm not blowing up TSMC. If you do that, you have a $2 trillion economic impact on the global economy within the first year, and you'd put manufacturing around the world at a standstill. I mean, this is a terrible.
That's exactly why they would do it.
Well, I don't think they will, but it could. You know, I don't think it'll go that far. But
it means he's been party to conversations where that's entertained.
Like that previous one, the previous clip you saw with that female senator talking to Avril Haines about how. What's funny about that, and that's another example of it, is how these senators and politicians are being fed this intelligence. Like in the case that senator are talking about China, she's fed all this intelligence from intelligence briefings that they all get because they don't know shit otherwise. They're fed it by the intelligence agencies to say that, for example, China is brokering peace deals around the world. One example is China. One of our problems is China is brokering peace deals around the world with people that we want to keep at war with each other because that's good for America. But China is going and is successfully getting them to come together and establish diplomatic ties and be friendly to each other. You know, and that's what are we going to do about that? The senator says to the Director of National Intelligence or any other CIA or intel agency personage. And the funny thing about that is that question that senator is posing to the Intel Director of National Intelligence came from the Director of National Intelligence and people like her to the senator, formed it in the senator's mind for her, and then got
she loops it back,
brings her into a meeting and asks her a question, and the Director of National Intelligence says, "That's a very good question, mainly because I'm the one who actually came up with it and told you more or less to ask me that question so I could opine on it. Thanks very much."
But not only that, she and other spooks then go back to their secure offices, and they come up with things like, let's blow up Nord Stream.
No,
because Congress is demanding we do something about the situation.
Exactly. But that's the problem. They're having to push back against that because they feed this information, this kind of like parade of horribles, dire situation, which is ridiculous. You know, for example, what are we going to do about people having, you know, making peace with each other in the Middle East? That's horrible. What are we going to do about it? They feed that information to them, and then to the senators, the politicians. And they get all worked up about it. They say, okay, well, we're Congress, we're the Senate, we're the real power in this country, aren't we? Right? Everybody, aren't we the real power in this country? Yeah. Did you come up with that question yourself, that problem yourself? Well, no, I got it from the intel agencies. But anyway, we got to do something about it because they're the ones, that's how it works, right? The intel agencies gather the intelligence, give it to us, and we decide what action to take on it, right? So we then bring the intel agency back in that just give me this information to ask her what we're going to do about the information. When the intel agency already has decided they know what they're going to do about it because they're the one who came up with the problem in the first place. So we're just a bunch of tools here, just mouthpieces basically to create the appearance of some kind of functioning democracy when it's actually the intel agencies that run it. But the problem then is that these people, puffed up with their own importance, like in Congress and the Senate, they sit there and they think, well, we're the deciders, right? We're the ones who run this country. So what are we going to do about it? Let's come up with ideas of, well, maybe we should blow up China or blow up Taiwan or blow up something, right? Blow up the semiconductor factory in Taiwan. And the intelligence go, oh, hold on a fucking minute. You know what I mean? You guys aren't equipped to do this. That's not your job. You're there just to ask us the questions that we fed to you, so that we can then talk on it. We can set a policy or set the tone. You know, you're not actually meant to come up with these ideas yourself, because you're just it's like you're a bunch of kids basically coming up with crazy ideas about what you should do about it, and then we're in a position where we have to push back against you. Well, no, don't blow up. No, we won't be blowing up. I know you guys make the decisions and all that, but we won't be blowing up TSMC in Taiwan, okay? Now, just wait for our next briefing, and then you can ask us about that, okay?
Right. There's another domestic issue in the U.S. that's it's ongoing, isn't it? The border crisis thing.
Yeah.
At the beginning of last week, there was this incident in Brownsville, Texas, which is right on the border, right? 7 dead when a car ran over a bus shelter with migrants in it. Did you see any follow-up from that? I mean, was that someone deliberately targeting migrants? Don't know. But
white supremacy.
White supremacy, right? That's probably how it's been framed. But the same week, Title 42 was lifted. This is a pandemic era restriction that turned away many asylum seekers at the border. Well, it expired last week. The right in the US is like up in arms. Oh my God, there's going to be an invasion. I don't know if numbers have increased of people attempting to get through, but in recent days, USA Today reports 1,500 active duty military troops have been deployed to the border as a backup for U.S. Customs agents, joining roughly 24,000 law enforcement officers and 2,500 National Guard troops already there. I don't know where this is going to go, but this is where, again, is he fed this? This is a senator, okay, demanding a solution from, I think she's the head of some agency. It sounds to me like he's all but calling for a, quote, special military operation in Mexico. John Kennedy, he's no relation to the other Kennedys.
If President Lopez Obrador invited the American military and our law enforcement personnel to come into Mexico and work with his, we could stop the cartels, couldn't we?
I believe, Senator, that we can stop the cartels.
Okay. Have you made that suggestion to President Biden?
If I could, I believe that we can stop the cartels by...
Have you made that suggestion to President Biden?
Senator, I have been very vocal in the whole of government setting on the importance of fentanyl, and all of us using every single effort and authority that we
Why hasn't President Biden done it? I mean, this is the way the American people, whose sons and daughters are dying, look at it. Our economy is $23 trillion. Mexico's economy is $1.3 trillion. Ours is 18 times bigger. We buy $400 billion every year from Mexico. Without the people of America, Mexico, figuratively speaking, would be eating cat food out of a can and living in a tent behind an outback. So why don't you and the president, embarrassing no one, get on the phone and call President Lopez Obrador and make him a deal he can't refuse to allow our military and our law enforcement officials to go into Mexico and work with his to stop the cartels? Why don't you do that?
Senator, what I am doing every single day is working with the incredible men and women of DEA who are risking their lives.
He should read Woody Collins' book on CIA drug running, and then he'd know the answer.
An offer they can't refuse.
Yes, I
That's
know, yeah.
literally a mafia line.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious. Like, I mean, these people are all
They're
talking.
going to end up with the whole world hating them.
These people, yeah. Well, it's going that direction already, but these people don't know. I mean, obviously, members of Congress, members of the Senate, DEA, different government enforcement agencies, they don't really have a control over the situation. They don't know. They don't have the power to do anything about it. Clearly, they just talk about it and then nothing happens. Why? Nobody knows. Because someone else is pulling the strings, obviously, and you're just a bunch of puppets, really. You know. So anyway, that's the state of the world.
They finally nabbed Khan in Pakistan.
Yeah. Well, that's ongoing. They might kill him, but who knows?
That was intense, wasn't it?
He's
already been ordered released by the Supreme Court because the arrest was, quote, illegal. But it's incredibly how sharp and crystal clear the division in Pakistan is now.
Well,
people there talk about a deep state, and Khan is their man. He's their Trump, versus the military intelligence establishment,
which is heavily aligned with the Americans.
Yeah, you've explained it on other recent shows. I know. Khan, my God, just 1 year.
But they tried to kill him last year.
They tried to kill him well, 1 year ago this month, he said that Khan, then still Prime Minister, said the country was ruled by traitors, installed by a foreign conspiracy plotted in the United States.
Yeah,
He's wrote all this out in tweets.
It's been that way for a long time. A deep state that is basically a CIA creation, a Pakistani deep state that's a CIA creation, has been for a long time. Goes way back, like to the Mujahideen and the fighting the Soviets, and some things never change, Back then, the CIA created deep state in Pakistan was set up in the context of the Soviets in Afghanistan and pushing the Soviets out of Afghanistan and funding the Mujahideen. And the reason that Khan is appears to be a threat to the Pakistani deep state today is for the very same reasons. It's largely the same reason in the sense of the global balance of power and which way Pakistan goes, whether it aligns with the West, stays aligned with the West, or aligns with Russia and China. So it's the same game that they were playing 45, 50 years ago. Exactly the same game.
Turkey, Pakistan.
Right, and Khan's a
Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. So some things never change. It's sad, but there you go. Maybe one day people will wake up. But for now, we're going to leave it because I've done all the waking up I can do. I'm going to go back to sleep. So we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thank you for watching, listening. Hope you enjoyed the show and for commenting, of course. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week on another one. So until then, have a good one. See you later.
Thanks for watching. Bye all.
Can't stop the signal now.